Under the scorching June sun, the dusty square of Lakewood Springs stood silent, as if holding its breath. It wasn't the suffocating heat that caused the stillness, but the grim and unsettling scene unfolding at the town's center. Atop a makeshift wooden platform stood a young girl, thin, disheveled, her tangled hair obscuring half her face. Her head hung low and her eyes were void of light. A fresh bruise marked her cheek, a silent testament to what she had endured. $20 for the last lot today. The sheriff's voice rang out, tearing through the eerie quiet like a blade. He couldn't hide the fatigue in his tone as he added, 19 years old, healthy, obedient. The crowd that had gathered watched in uneasy silence, some with heads bowed in shame, others staring with morbid curiosity and a flicker of dark amusement. No one spoke, but the silence itself felt like an unspoken verdict. A short distance away stood the girl's parents, a worn-out couple with hollow faces, already numb with despair. At the back of the crowd, a large, dark-skinned man stood motionless, fists clenched. Isaiah Montgomery, 42, widowed, and the only black landowner in the area, watched the scene unfold with a tormented gaze. His heart weighed heavy with memories of his late wife and the injustices they had suffered on this very land. The girl never raised her head, but each breath she drew felt like a stifled sigh. Resignation clung to her like a second skin, and in the oppressive heat of the square, it was that very silence that sent chills down the spine. Isaiah couldn't look away. He knew that stepping into this auction meant risking everything, but he didn't flinch. It wasn't a servant he sought. It was something far greater, a chance to break the endless cycle of pain and injustice. That feeling of helplessness gripped Isaiah, but it was that same feeling that drove him forward. He knew too well the price of silence. He had stayed silent when his wife was turned away, when no doctor would treat her because of her skin color, and now, standing before another soul being trampled underfoot, he knew he couldn't stay silent again. In that moment, Isaiah stepped out of the shadows, and two strangers' fates began to intertwine, setting off a journey no one could have foreseen. I'm Isaiah Montgomery. I know who you are, the girl replied, surprising him. Who around here does? The two walked away from the square in heavy silence, whispers and venomous mutters trailing behind them like a rising tide. Cold stares sliced through Isaiah like blades. God, they sold the girl to a black man? This won't end well. Someone needs to put a stop to this. Sarah walked a step behind him, as though instinct told her that was the safest place to be. As they passed the saloon, Frank Holloway spat on the ground in disgust. $70 is too much for something you won't be keeping long, Montgomery, he said loudly, making sure the whole town could hear. Isaiah didn't turn, didn't speak. He simply continued walking toward the rickety wagon waiting at the edge of town, where an old, faithful horse stood patiently under the fading light. As he helped Sarah climb aboard, he noticed her trembling. It wasn't fear of him. It was the fear of what might lie ahead, born from a past too full of pain. Isaiah leaned in, speaking softly so only she could hear. I won't hurt you. I promise. For the first time, she looked him in the eye. And in that gaze, Isaiah saw more than pain. He saw something familiar, a quiet, burning spark. The same look he saw in the mirror each morning. The look of someone who had survived a cruel world and had not yet given up. Aylin, she whispered, her voice barely a breeze. Isaiah didn't answer right away. He took the reins, started the wagon moving, then finally said, because I know what it feels like to be treated like a thing. As the wagon rolled away from town, hostile glares clung to them like shadows. No one noticed the small piece of metal Sarah had carefully hidden in her torn shoe, or the fleeting glance she exchanged with a figure hidden in the dark. Sarah wasn't just a girl who had been bought. She carried a secret that could change the fate of Lakewood Springs forever. Dusk had fallen by the time they arrived. a modest wooden cabin nestled amid the parched land and drought-stricken oak trees. Isaiah brought the wagon to a stop, jumped down and said, "This is my home. Not big, not fancy, but it's mine. No one will bother you here." Sarah remained seated on the wagon, her eyes scanning the surroundings like a small animal that had once been hunted. She gauged the distance, assessed escape routes, and kept a cautious pace, as if any forward movement might trigger a trap. "There's a room in the back," Isaiah continued, his voice low and steady. "It used to be my son's. There's a lock on the inside. You can use it if you want." The word son made Sarah pause. "Your son?" "Jacob. Died with his mother. Pneumonia. 2 winters ago," Isaiah said, his voice even and free of self-pity. "He was only 5. The small house was quiet, lit only by the dim yellow glow of an oil lamp on the wooden table. A strange sign that someone had been there before them. Sarah stood at the threshold, still keeping her distance, her gaze cold but deep, like she was stepping into a chess game where every move was a matter of survival. She suddenly froze. Something about the room felt off, like someone had just been there. Her body tensed, eyes flashing with primal alertness. "Wait here," Isaiah said, immediately sensing the shift in her demeanor. He quickly swept through the house before letting out a relieved sigh. It was Ruth. She stopped by and left some food. The name startled Sarah. "Ruth Wilkins, the midwife?" Isaiah nodded, a bit surprised. "You know her?" "She helped my mother through labor once," she replied, her tone evasive, like she didn't want to revisit the memory. The house was small but meticulously kept. Books were neatly arranged on a makeshift shelf, and though the table was old, it shone from frequent cleaning. This wasn't the home of someone who had surrendered to fate. It was a quiet fortress of someone still fighting against it. Dinner was cloaked in silence. Isaiah sliced bread with calloused hands, then unexpectedly said, "You were planning to run tonight, weren't you?" Sarah froze, her body taut like a wire on the verge of snapping. "I don't blame you," he continued calmly. "But the eastern woods are crawling with 3 bounty hunters. The mayor hired them after 3 slaves escaped from the Sullivan plantation." Sarah sprang to her feet. "I'm not a slave." "No, you're not," Isaiah said, locking eyes with her. "But try explaining that to them in the dark. They don't need a reason, just a target." The next morning, Sarah woke to find the house empty and the door unlocked. She wasn't a prisoner. Through the window, she saw Isaiah working by the well, carefully pouring precious drops of water onto the dying trees during the drought. He kept going, though hope looked more like ashes than flame. She quietly searched the house, at first for money or anything of value, but instead she found something else, a book of federal law, heavily marked with meticulous notes. Beside it was a stack of letters addressed to Professor Williams, Boston University, a network of knowledge and legal insight, not the kind of thing a poor black man in the Deep South would keep for show. Before she could read more, the sound of hooves echoed outside. 3 riders entered the yard. Sarah recognized Frank Holloway, Walter Schmidt, and a tall stranger, dressed in a long coat, his face carrying a well-practiced look of false friendliness. Isaiah set down his hoe and stepped forward, standing tall, his gaze unwavering. "Montgomery," Holloway began, feigning politeness, "we came to introduce Judge Davis, our new district judge." The tall man gave a slight nod, though his eyes were icy cold. "I've heard your name. We're conducting a routine property check for the county records," he said. "I've paid all my taxes," Isaiah replied curtly.
"This isn't about taxes," Schmidt interjected with a malicious grin. "It's about land use efficiency. Unproductive land can be reclaimed for reallocation," Judge Davis added, his voice dripping with syrupy politeness. Standing behind him, Sarah watched Isaiah's jaw tighten, though his face remained calm. "This land's been in my name since 1869. I have all the legal paperwork," he said. "Times change, Montgomery," Holloway sneered. "So do the laws." As they rode off, Sarah stepped closer, suspicion written plainly on her face. "And they're trying to steal your land." Isaiah didn't deny it. He simply bent down and resumed watering, as if their visit meant nothing. They've always wanted it, he said quietly. But there's nothing left. The drought's killed everything. Isaiah looked up, revealing a flicker of something bittersweet in his eyes. Bitterness, but also defiance. That barren land, despite everything, still symbolized the last fragment of freedom he held. And some things, even if no longer fertile, were still worth defending, at any cost. Because there's something here worth more than a few acres of dry soil, Isaiah said, his eyes glowing with quiet resolve. That afternoon, Ruth Wilkins arrived in a tarp-covered wagon. A stately black woman with a penetrating gaze that seemed to see straight through unspoken truths. Ruth brought essentials, seeds, and something more valuable, news. The new judge visited 5 properties today, she said, as she carefully examined Sarah's bruises, every one of them owned by black families or immigrants. Isaiah nodded, as if confirming what he already suspected. Ruth handed him a sealed envelope. Telegram from Boston this morning. Jenkins asked me to deliver it quietly. After reading it, Isaiah's eyes turned steely and sharp. He called out, "Sarah." She froze in surprise. "I need you to tell me exactly what you overheard during your father's meetings with Mayor Marshall." Sarah's face paled, the shock only lasting a moment. "How do you know about that?" Ruth placed a hand on her shoulder, her voice gentle but firm. "You're not the first girl we've tried to save from that family." Sarah went still. The auction that day, Isaiah's strange kindness, suddenly all of it took on a different meaning. They hadn't bought her out of pity. It was for something deeper, something larger. She realized she wasn't alone. The small key she'd kept hidden in her shoe for weeks now felt heavier, burdened with memory and responsibility. "My father has a deed," Sarah began. "Locked in a drawer. It lists payments, names, dates. Mayor Marshall's planning something big. It involves Judge Davis and a strip of land along the river." Isaiah and Ruth exchanged a look. No words were needed. "That's why your father was willing to sell you off like that?" Sarah nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. "For the first time since they met. I heard too much, saw too much. They couldn't risk keeping me." Meanwhile, in Lakewood Springs, the rumors had started to stir about the black man who dared buy a white girl, about strange figures seen creeping around Isaiah's home at night, about the new railway line soon to connect the mines with the county seat, cutting right through his land. No one noticed that the deed had gone missing from Mr. Collins' house. No one knew about the telegrams sent at night, written in codes only insiders could decipher. Because sometimes it's the ones labeled invisible who see the most clearly. And sometimes a revolution doesn't begin with a scream, but with whispers in the dark, with hands long dismissed now quietly weaving the future. A few days after Judge Davis's visit, an unusual storm swept through Lakewood Springs. In the chaos, no one noticed the small figure moving through the shadows around the town hall, her face hidden beneath a dark cloak. Sarah Collins, who everyone thought had been bought and locked away at the edge of town, was now deep inside the heart of power. The key in her shoe, stolen from her father weeks earlier, had finally found its purpose. The lock on the mayor's office gave a quiet click, the sound of a truth long buried beginning to surface. At the same moment, Isaiah stepped into the post office, drenched from the rain. Jenkins, the postmaster and a quiet ally to the powerless, gave a subtle nod. "The line to Boston is open," he murmured, then stepped out, leaving Isaiah alone before the telegraph machine, ready to send a message that could change everything. The next morning, the sun blazed mercilessly. Its harsh light seemed to expose every secret long buried in the town's heart. Inside Holloway's saloon, Mayor Marshall, Judge Davis, and 3 wealthy landowners gathered, their faces drawn with tension. "What do you mean, gone?" Marshall hissed, his face pale as a ghost. "Documents don't just vanish." "The filing cabinet was locked," Davis stammered, fumbling with his tie. "No one has the key but me." Frank Holloway poured himself more whiskey, his voice low and laced with venom. "What about that black man, Montgomery? I've always known he wasn't simple. No way, Marshall shot back. He couldn't have gone into town hall without someone seeing. What they didn't know was that at that very moment, 6 copies of the stolen documents were being posted outside the church, the market, and even on the doors of town hall itself. The already tense atmosphere in Lakewood Springs tightened like a drum, ready to snap. Ruth Wilkins, calm as if going about her daily chores, quietly pinned each paper in place. They revealed the dark truth behind a meticulously planned scheme to seize strategic land, designed to profit handsomely before the new railroad project was made public. At exactly 10 a.m., a special train arrived at the town's tiny station. 3 men stepped off: a representative from the Transcontinental Railroad Company, a federal official from the Department of the Interior, and a journalist from the Boston Globe. Isaiah met them and led them straight down Main Street, where townsfolk were gathering around the postings. The murmurs turned into waves, then into a storm. The townspeople suddenly grasped the magnitude of the conspiracy recorded in Mr. Collins' deed book, each line a dagger to the town's dignity and legal integrity. "Fudgerade!" Mayor Marshall bellowed from the saloon door. "All of it's fabricated!" "Including your signature on every page?" the federal official asked calmly. "Or the detailed map outlining how you planned to redirect the railroad route for personal gain from illegally seized land?" Walter Schmidt tried to slip out through the back, only to be blocked by the town sheriff. "You knew about this?" Schmidt stammered. "Not everything," the sheriff replied, eyes locked on him. "But enough to know I'm not stopping what's coming." The crowd swelled. Faces that once turned away from Isaiah now looked at him with awe and newfound respect. But the real shock came when Sarah stepped out from the church, accompanied by Reverend Thornton.
This young woman, the Reverend announced, risked her life to provide crucial evidence of crimes that affect every citizen in this town. Sarah stood tall, her eyes hard as they met the furious glare of her father. Mr. Collins, who had just arrived, face flushed red. "You," he roared, starting to lunge forward. "I wouldn't recommend that," the federal official warned. "Your daughter has provided detailed accounts of how you and Mayor Marshall forged land documents and stole property from at least 7 families over the past 2 years." A postal clerk ran up and handed Judge Davis a telegram. "The Massachusetts Bar Association is very interested in how someone previously disbarred for misconduct is now serving as a judge in another state," the Boston Globe journalist added, barely masking his contempt. "You don't have the authority to do this," Marshall shouted, scanning the room for a way out. "This town belongs to me." "Belonged," the railroad company representative corrected coldly. "Our company is particularly concerned with how sensitive project information was leaked and who orchestrated it." What followed was chaos, as if history had written the script in advance. Marshall was arrested while trying to slip out the back door. Holloway collapsed mentally and confessed in desperation. Every detail was carefully recorded, not by the press, but by those who had long been pushed to society's margins. Because in the end, justice doesn't always arrive with weapons, but with the quiet resolve of those brave enough to stare into the darkness and step through it. Mr. Collins' furious screams echoed through the square as officers entered his home to seize the deed book, undeniable proof of the long-standing conspiracy that had cast its shadow over Lakewood Springs for years. But the moment that held the crowd breathless wasn't the police action. It was the confrontation between a daughter and the father who had heartlessly cast her aside. "You sold me," Sarah said, her voice steady, "as if I were no longer human, just like you sold this town's dignity for greed and power." A shadow seemed to fall over the square's edge as Mr. Collins, backed into a corner, revealed his true cruelty. "What did you expect? Your mother left because she couldn't bear to look at you. Our living mistake. You are never meant to breathe the air of this world." Silence, thick as velvet, draped over the scene. Then Isaiah stepped forward, his expression no longer angry, but deeply composed. "Every soul in this square has the same worth, Mr. Collins," he said slowly. And that's the truth you've always tried to bury, that human dignity can never be priced. As the conspirators were led away, disorders spread. Some demanded immediate punishment, others pretended to have always stood for justice. Those who once sneered at Isaiah now clung to him, desperate to reclaim lost honor. Few noticed the quiet exchange between the railroad representative and Isaiah, or the federal agent's careful inspection of land deeds in Montgomery's name. Nor did they pay attention to the subtle nod Ruth gave Sarah as the Boston journalist approached for an interview, because the real story wasn't what was happening above ground, but in what had been quietly prepared for years. For the secret to that victory didn't lie in sudden defiance, but in a plan sown long ago, sparked by what once seemed a meaningless meeting between a professor from Boston and a former slave, determined to change the world, one letter at a time. 6 months after that fateful day, the dawn over Lakewood Springs no longer marked a town steeped in gloom, but the beginning of a new era. The train station, once a tool manipulated to steal, now stood proudly on the edge of Isaiah Montgomery's land. The Transcontinental Railroad Company had made a historic decision after discovering the route proposed by Mayor Marshall was built on unstable ground, while Isaiah's long-overlooked land proved solid, like the man himself. That small wooden house now shared space with a school. What began as makeshift lessons for 3 black children denied by the town school system soon became a haven for white children and immigrants alike. A new community emerged, not built on skin color or family names, but on knowledge and empathy. Sarah Montgomery, after a quiet wedding officiated by Reverend Thornton, was the teacher. She remained soft-spoken, but her eyes no longer cast downward. The same determination that helped bring down an empire now illuminated every lesson she taught. "I never thought I'd be a teacher," she admitted one still afternoon, watching 20 children study beneath the large tree. "Back then," she smiled faintly, "I didn't even dare raise my head when someone called my name." Isaiah, busy building a new desk, looked up. "I always knew there was a fire in you," he said. "You just needed a little air to let it burn." Former Mayor Marshall, the man who once held all the power, was now serving time in state prison. The charges: fraud and extortion. And the town, once paralyzed by fear, had begun learning to stand on its own, not by hollow promises, but through the courageous choices of those who were once invisible. Judge Davis, the man who once distorted justice, vanished in the night like a coward. Rumor had it he was captured in Chicago under a false name, without ID or title, nothing but a shadow of the man who once wore the robes of power. Frank Holloway, who once mocked the worth of human life, had lost everything. His saloon seized, his fortune gone, now reduced to laboring on a distant dock, where no one knew the venom he once spread in Lakewood Springs. As for Collins, Sarah's father, his downfall didn't come from prison, but from the public humiliation that stripped him of what he valued more than money: his reputation. Now, he survived off the pity of a few old acquaintances, a quiet shadow of a man, so broken that even darkness seemed to avoid him. One warm evening, during the weekly dinner of the group that had transformed the town, Ruth Wilkins shared an update. "We just received a reply from Benson." Jenkins, the postmaster, sat beside Sheriff Jensen, the man who had finally learned to stand on the side of what's right. They were among those who chose to change, not with grand speeches, but through quiet daily action. Benson, the elderly professor from Boston University who had first recognized the legal brilliance in a man who had once been enslaved, was the first to believe that Isaiah Montgomery could reshape the law, one word at a time. "He's approved the proposal to expand the education initiative," Ruth continued, her eyes glowing with conviction. 15 scholarships for the children here. 15 lives transformed," Sarah murmured, her hand unconsciously brushing the small scar on her wrist, a mark from a time when she believed she had no future. The next morning, as the first commercial train officially arrived at Lakewood Springs Station, a small ceremony was held. The new mayor, a man of integrity elected through a special vote, gave a speech about renewal and hope. But every gaze in the crowd turned toward the couple standing modestly in the corner of the platform. Isaiah and Sarah Montgomery. An elderly woman approached Sarah, her voice trembling slightly but sincere. "It's all thanks to you." This was the same woman who once avoided Sarah's eyes when they passed on the street months ago. Now she held her hand tightly. "My son just got hired at the station. No one ever gave a boy like him a chance before." From a distance, the young man, with one leg shorter than the other, waved proudly, dressed in his new railroad uniform. His eyes sparkled, the eyes of someone once shut out of every opportunity, now standing at the center of a newly opened future. And so at the dawn of a town once swallowed by darkness, a new generation began to take its first steps, not on the stone foundation of old power, but on a path paved with courage, sacrifice, and a relentless will to rise. If Isaiah and Sarah's story touched your heart, if you believe that justice doesn't begin with power, but with courage, then please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next stories. Every follow from you is a spark of encouragement that fuels us to keep telling heartfelt journeys about ordinary people with extraordinary hearts who dare to face adversity, dare to create change, and dare to love in a world full of challenges. Thank you for being with us. See you in the next story.